Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for this special. This is the first time we've done this. This is a special, I'm going to call it an election version of the Deer Talk Now podcast. I am Dan Schmidt. I am joined today by the Lieutenant Governor of Ohio, Jon Husted. Jon, thank you for joining us on the program.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Like I said, this is the first time we've done that. We're dropping this the night before the election. We're going to talk about deer hunting, but we're also going to talk about how important not only deer hunting, but hunting and conservation and wildlife management is in the American fabric. But before I get to that, I've already known that you're a hunter because we featured your daughter last year. And I just saw you've already got your buck tag filled for this archery season, don't you?
I did. I got it a week ago Saturday. It was a nice 9-point buck and beautiful morning, out there with the leaves. And literally I was in the stand. I passed on an 8-pointer that walked by me like literally 10 minutes after I got in my stand. And I just waited out there. And the next thing I know, I hear a bunch of noise coming in from behind me. And there were about 4 or 5 does coming through. And there were 2 bucks following them, the 8-pointer on one side of my tree, and then this 9-pointer. And I'd seen them both on my cameras, so I knew how much wider the rack was on the 9-pointer, had a little drop tine on it, and I just said, that's the one I'm going to take. And so that's exactly what happened. And I was able to get an early harvest in deer season.
That's pretty awesome. Not too many. I've interviewed a lot of people on this podcast over the years. This is number 132 of this version. We've had this podcast for 13 years, but there's not too many, forgive the phrase, politicians that will come on and admit they're deer hunters, number one, even if we know they're deer hunters. But number two, you have zero qualms in showing that not only on social media, but telling people about it.
Well, look, I'm not alone. There are probably 400,000 people in Ohio who deer hunt, and this is all part of wildlife management. Ask the farmers. You got to manage the population to avoid crop damage. You got to manage the population to minimize highway accidents, and we manage that very well through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources here in the state. And I love it. It's just one of my favorite things to do.
That is awesome. You don't happen to know Mike Tonkovich, do you?
I don't know him well. I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mike is, I've known Mike for the entire 30 years I've worked here. One of the best managers in the nation, and he's from Ohio. He has helped us just immeasurably with our statistics over the years. I want to get into some of that, but one thing that I've always said about Ohio, everybody thinks about Ohio as a trophy buck destination, or even if you live there, it's great for managing for trophy bucks. But Ohio, in my opinion, has gotten it right in the fact that if you look at the harvest, we've done so much work on this over the years, but Ohio is pretty close to almost a 50-50 when it comes to archery harvest versus firearms harvest, which is something I think everybody should aspire to. But I don't know if you knew that, but you're right up there.
Yeah, I do. I think I think it's 48, almost 49% archery. And I bet this year, because it's been so nice this fall, that I think that the archery numbers probably will go up. We might hit 50% this year. And look, the technology has gotten so much better on them. And also, one of the things that's underappreciated is because there are a lot of places. Ohio is a mix of urban and rural, but it's not a large landmass state. And so a lot of these places that you hunt are sort of suburban, rural kind of places, and which really lend themselves to an archery hunt rather than a firearm hunt because of houses and other things that may be near, or golf courses or whatever. And the archery hunt is a really safe, great way to hunt in a lot of areas that you might not be able to do it.
That is 100% true. And if you guys are thinking about Ohio, well, it's not that big of a state. They're still killing 200,000 deer a year, which puts them in the top 10 in the nation just for sheer deer harvest. If you guys aren't familiar with the Lieutenant Governor, I'm just going to give you a brief biography here. He's been in the public servant office for over 20 years. He was a member of the House of Representatives in Ohio. He was a state senator. He also served as Ohio Secretary of State. What brought you to the position that you have now, Jon? I know that you had thought about running for governor and then kind of pulled back and decided to run for a lieutenant governor with the current governor.
Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, in the end, it's always about service. It's just solving problems and having a platform to be able to do that. I've always cared a lot about economic development, workforce development, education, things like that. Governor DeWine has given me, as lieutenant governor, the ability to work on all those issues. I love technology. One of the things that we've done here in Ohio is we've made all of our fishing data. So we have this stocking program where we stock fish, in all of these lakes around the state. I now have helped with the work of ODNR. We now have all of that data online so that people can go look and see what lakes have what fish, when they were stocked, what kind of. I mean, it's just we've really used technology to improve the way we serve our outdoorsmen and women in this state. And, we've got great fisheries like Lake Erie. We've got a lot of inland lakes, and then we got Appalachia to the south east, and then more farm country to the northwest, and we just got a diversity of opportunities out there in wildlife, and being in the legislature, being lieutenant governor allows me to have a positive impact on all those things.
And you've done that in Ohio. How important is tomorrow's election with people who hold these things near and dear to their heart?
Yeah, I do think it's very important that you elect people who understand these issues. I mean, you should for people who care a lot about hunting and fishing, who's the person that you're electing? Do they hunt or do they fish? Because if you want them to understand what you care about, you got to have people that have those experiences in their lives. And tomorrow's election, oh my gosh. I mean, I've never seen an election where we have just so many candidates with polar opposite views of one another. And for all of your listeners and viewers and everybody out there, get out and vote. You got to make your voice heard. That's one of the great privileges of living in a free world. But freedom requires responsibility, and one of those responsibilities is voting.
Absolutely. And if you don't, I mean, if anybody, we're not telling you who to vote for, we're just saying to vote. And if you don't think that it matters, look at Colorado right now. Colorado is a mess. Colorado, it's ballot box mentality on trapping especially, and some hunting initiatives. They're in the fight for their lives right now, and I just hope everybody there, as well as everybody in Ohio and Wisconsin and every place else, understands that every vote does count. And it just get out there and do it. If you live next to me, I will drive you to the polls.
It can happen so you cook. It can happen so quickly. You're like, well, this will never happen. No, it can go in just a couple of years where you elect the wrong people, and then the next thing you know, you're not allowed to trap. You're not allowed to hunt, do things like that in the way that you traditionally have been accustomed to doing it. And gun rights restrictions, you name it, all of those things can come your way very quickly. I know it doesn't seem like, well, not in our state, but it can happen to anybody. That's why you got to constantly pay attention to these issues.
It can absolutely happen to anybody. And one thing I wanted also on your insight, Jon, is I know that Ohio has a lot of that residential type. I don't want to call it urban, but you do have some bigger cities, and they have somehow figured out a way to still maintain pretty quality hunting opportunities in places like near Columbus or near Cleveland or some of these other bigger cities. How have they done that, and how do you think that has been able to be successful?
Well, first of all, I can tell you that as Lieutenant Governor DeWine and I have worked hard at expanding the amount of public land that's available. We've done this through purchasing reclaimed mine land and things like this that were once for industrial or a mining use, and then purchasing that land and then turning it back over for hunting and fishing to the public. We've also, for water quality efforts, worked with the agriculture community to set aside a lot of new land and create wetlands with it. Not necessarily a lot of deer hunting there, but a lot of waterfowl hunting and things like that, and also improving the water quality for fishing and the like. So we've had an active strategy that is conservation. It's conservation focused, where we've figured out how to use public dollars to invest in land that we can really turn back over to these uses. And we also have a wildlife council. So we have active hunters and fishermen who are involved in trapping and the Big Buck Club and other of these established wildlife groups in the state of Ohio. They are an advisory council that advises the governor and advises Ohio Department of Natural Resources on all of these things, and they talk it through. And that's the great thing is that sometimes the people who are active hunters, fishers, and trappers may question ODNR's management techniques. So ODNR works with them, and then they communicate that back out to the hunting community and fishing community, and then they get that feedback, and it works through. And it's amazing what communication does. If you're just willing to listen to each other about what the needs are, making sure we have enough wildlife officers, that they're enforcing the rules, that people feel like they're being treated fairly. All of that goes into creating just a great place to be an outdoorsman. We think that we take a lot of pride in that in Ohio, and we know it's a balance because we know, like, we're an industrial state. We know people, we make things here. As we say, Ohio's the heart of it all because we make the things that people need to live and thrive. But on the weekends, you want to go out and enjoy your life, right? And the place to do that is to have trails and places to hunt and fish, and we've just prioritized that and institutionalized it with the Wildlife Council and the communication back out to all of these local clubs about what we're doing.
How involved is the state, from the chair you sit in, as far as oversight on where tax dollars are being spent, where Pittman Robertson dollars are being spent on conservation and improving those natural resources?
So that's exactly what we do with this council, and just like literally I don't know if this happens in other states, but we just had a wild game dinner at the governor's residence.
Wow.
And we invited hundreds of outdoors men and women, trappers, hunters, fishermen, to the governor's residence. Everybody catches up. We talk. We eat some walleye. We eat some deer. We eat some quail. I mean, we have all different kinds of food there that the different groups make right there on the premises, and just have those conversations so that everybody is on the same page. And from time to time, issues will pop up, but for the most part, as long as you're keeping that chain of communication open, then you can have buy-in to how those dollars are spent, and that's worked really well for us here. But it's you gotta want to do it. You got to spend the time to listen and talk to people.
I give you guys credit for doing that, and I know that's how they do it here, and I know that's how they do it in other states like Minnesota and Pennsylvania. So I know some of the southern states have a little bit different way of handling it. I wanted to ask you, Jon, also about, we're talking about how important it is. Ohio is home to approximately, I'm going to guess, about 350,000 active deer hunters. What does that mean to your economy, and what are your concerns, if any, about the future?
Well, as you know about Ohio, we not only have a good sized deer population, but we have some big deer. I mean, because we have so much food for them to eat, because the farmers will tell you they do a pretty good job of keeping themselves healthy on corn and soybeans, and so we have some big deer. We have a lot of trophy deer, and so not only does it provide leisure activities, family activities for Ohioans, it's also people come here from other places to hunt in the fall. You have a lot of people that buy leases on property. They come here, they stay overnight in our hotels, they eat at our restaurants. it has an impact on the economy. We really do have a lot of travel and tourism with deer hunting, with waterfowl, and with fishing, particularly with Lake Erie being such a great draw. So, getting that wildlife management and the harvest management, whether it's fish stocking, it's whether it's the bag limits, whether, because like with deer, you have different bag limits depending on what county you're in, just to manage that population correctly so that it continues to be a thriving, dependable place. I think those two things go together. You want it to thrive, but you also want it to be dependable, that people can plan on being in Ohio and being out in the woods in the fall and enjoying themselves. And it has a sizable impact on our economy, not just with travel and tourism, but we have a lot of sporting outfits here and clubs and things like that are also generate a lot of revenue for our retailers.
And when you throw walleyes into that for Ohio, if you guys don't know, walleye fishing in Ohio is a mecca. You're going to be approaching an economic impact of approximately what we have here in Wisconsin just for deer, which is $1 billion with a B. That's something that can't be ignored. I don't care if you're a hunter or a non-hunter. That's something that you have to take into account. John,
Yeah, the estimate in Ohio is $1.9 billion dollars and 12,000 jobs.
12,000 jobs and
permanent jobs.
Just a tick shy of $2 billion, which I can't get my head around.
So,
but it's a lot of money and a lot of people that are affected. Tell us, before I ask you my next question, tell us about how did you, I know you've been bow hunting for a while, and I know that you shot your deer this year with a crossbow. What is your history? Tell us how you started in deer hunting and where it got you to where you're bow hunting today.
Yeah, well, it started when I was 14 years old. I lived out in rural Northwest Ohio. I lived in a county called Williams County. It's up by the Michigan-Indiana border, so it's way up in the corner of Ohio. And my first deer was a doe that I got 40 minutes into my first time ever hunting. I had a single shot 12 gauge, and my dad sort of plopped me by this tree, and he's like, "Okay, you stand there, and we're all going to go around here." And next thing I know, doe runs up on me, and I take my shot, and I got my first deer 40 minutes into my first hunt. So that was a lot of fun for me. But just over the years, it's changed.
So you actually know how to load a shotgun then, is what you're telling us.
I do know how to load a shotgun and a rifle and a crossbow, and it can do all those things. And field dress a deer. I know. And to actually field dress a deer by myself, although loading it up into the back end of my SUV on my own is not as easy as it once was, now that I'm not quite as young and strong as I used to be. But look, I started out hunting with my dad, right? And then you go from there to that next phase in your life where you're out on your own, then you're hunting with your buddies, right? And you go away and you go to maybe deer camp and you hang out and you do all that stuff. And then you get a little older and you have children, and then now it's transitioned to hunting with my children, my daughters mostly now. As you mentioned, my daughter got a big buck, a bigger one than I've ever gotten a couple years ago. And then now it's also a way for me as a busy guy to just go and have some peace for a couple hours now, like not get away from my technology, sit out in the woods, look at the beautiful, leaves changing. And I used to mostly gun hunt all the time, but now I almost exclusively crossbow hunt just because I like the piece of it. It's a nice way to spend time with my kids, and it's just, that's the seasons of life, right? You're as a kid, you start hunting, a lot of us with our dads, maybe our uncles or our grandpas. Then you go out and you're this young man and you're doing it with the guys, and then you get a little older and it just changes. The seasons change of how you enjoy the sport. And I just enjoy just the peace of sitting in a tree. And if I happen to get a nice buck, then great. But if I don't, I still had a great 2 or 3 hours out there sitting in a tree stand and enjoying nature.
And I'm assuming you guys eat a lot of venison then too.
So my freezer is full of venison and walleye. That's what my family eats. Like we just that's all we do. My wife we just finished we're just finishing off. We had to just finish off our last year's 2 deer that we had. She just made a roast in the crock pot, and then potatoes and carrots in it, and my daughters eat it, and my daughters have grown up eating nothing but venison, so they don't really know what beef is because we just eat venison and walleye, and that's really what our freezer's full of, and that's just the way we enjoy doing it around the Husted household.
That's pretty awesome. I think you need to adopt me so I can get some of that walleye because we don't get too much of it here. That's a little bit harder for me to obtain. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Hoyt Archery and the all-new Alpha X30. Compact yet forgiving, it seamlessly blends into your hunting environment, whether you're nestled in your blind, perched in a tree stand, or venturing into the backcountry. The Alpha X30 allows you to make adjustments and tailor your performance like never before with the new HBX Exact Cam. For more information, visit Hoyt.com. So you talked about crossbows and crossbow hunting. Ohio is unique in the fact that you've had all inclusion since 1982. Where, from your experience, Jon, is there still that debate about, people say traditional, it's not traditional, compound bows versus crossbows, or has it really just become part of the fabric in Ohio's archery season?
Well, I think for most people, it's just part of the fabric of Ohio's archery season. Yeah, you're going to have, some disagreements amongst your buddies, right, about this kind of stuff. But the technology has come a long way. We still have a muzzleloader season, but let's face it, none of us are using flintlock guns anymore. We now have adopted in Ohio. We used to have only shotguns. Now you can do straight wall cartridge with rifles and things like that. And so the technology evolves, the weapons evolve with them, and I think for the most part people just accept that that's the way it is in Ohio. And by the numbers, I think that it's if you look at the archery yield, I'm just going to do this off the top of my head. I think it's like 2-to-1 crossbow versus traditional archery techniques these days. So I think we're all in on crossbows at this point in time.
We're all in on crossbows, and not to put you on the spot, but I hope you're got some friends in Mogador.
I do. The 10-point crossbow manufacturing facility is there, and that's what I use. And
that's awesome.
And
now we like you even more.
I want to.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I brought it. It's sitting right over here. I brought it with me today, but those are just. It's so easy. It's just an easy way, a safe way to crossbow hunt, and for me, as an Ohio elected official, I always talk about made in America, made in Ohio. It's nice to be able to hunt with a crossbow that's made in Ohio.
Made in Ohio, made in America, and just very finely built. The Bednar family, they've been just entrenched in that area forever. We've known them, Brad and I, since the entire time we've been here at Deer and Deer Hunting, but it's just a really nice success story that you still see a family-owned run business producing great equipment, and then out of a state that is known for trophy bucks, known for great deer hunting, great management. It's just a good story, I think. So speaking of archery,
yeah, it's a great business.
The state's bow hunters, we talked about this a little bit. You say it's going to be about 50% of that harvest, which is an anomaly. If you guys pick up the almanac and look at it, Ohio is head and shoulders above everybody else, because what we've said for the entire existence of deer and deer hunting is that archery could not be sustainable to manage a state's deer harvest. Do you agree or disagree with that? And what do you see, or do you believe that it could be sustainable in the future?
Well, I wouldn't consider myself an expert on that particular topic, but look, I think that that's what you have those conversations about with people in the wildlife community and the people who are the biologists who are experts on these things. You just keep updating your rules and regulations as circumstances require. So I think it would be kind of presumptuous of me to say that I know what the world's going to look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now. That's why we have the Wildlife Council that revisits these issues every year, and we adjust our rules accordingly. Like, you never know what will happen with a disease, what will happen with some other thing that could affect a population. I know that all of those things are factors, and that's why you need the biologists and the sportsmen to talk to one another about how to properly manage.
Excellent. Okay, one thing I want to let me just make sure that I've got all my. I do actually have a couple of questions here for you. What do you want non-hunters to know going to the polls tomorrow about not just in Ohio but across the country? What should they be aware of just outside of this conversation? What are some of the things that you would, I guess,
Non-hunter?
a non-hunter, somebody who's not an active deer hunter,
Yeah.
because I know people are listening that are probably got their families involved. They might be listening to the podcast, watching the podcast. What are some of the things that you think are at stake?
Well, if you're talking to a non-hunter who doesn't really understand hunting, all right, think about how I just described our family. The Husted family eats walleye, and we eat deer. Okay, so these are animals that are out there in nature. They live free. They don't live in pens. They're not given a bunch of antibiotics and things like that. They're out there roaming. And when you harvest one, it is something they don't suffer. You harvest responsibly, and it's a matter of seconds before that deer is humanely harvested. Right? That's a much better way to feed yourself than, I would say, a lot of the other methods that are used in the world. Right? I mean, think about it. Think about those things. So sportsmen are not just out there shooting guns and crossbows and things like that. We're responsibly managing wildlife so that we can live with agriculture, that we don't have an overpopulation where disease spreads and crops get damaged. It's also safe because, look, our highways go across rural Ohio. You have to manage the population too to reduce deer car accidents. So this is a smart way to do all this, and so that's what hunters are. Hunters are conservationists. They love wildlife. They love nature, and they love to do these things responsibly. And so just know that that's who the men and women are out there across the rural parts of your state. They love our country. They go work hard. This is what they call recreation, and you should support that way of life. And for those of us who are hunters, look, you got to get out there and make your voice heard, and make sure that you keep electing people. And it's a little late now, but when they're on the campaign trail, ask candidates this kind of stuff. What do they know about it? And by the way, and if they don't, then educate them on it. Help them understand, because that's what we have, the responsibility that we have as people who love the outdoors and love hunting. How are you educating the next generation? Sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, grandchildren. Are you doing your part to help continue this legacy? That's what you do in a free country. It doesn't just happen through osmosis or organically. You gotta constantly educate people.
I'm gonna end that right there, because I could not said that any better. If I even had a week to do that. Vote your conscience, vote your lifestyle, and just by all means, just get out there and vote tomorrow. That's all we're asking you to do. Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted, we thank you so much for joining us. This was a very special podcast. I very much appreciate your insights on everything that you've done and you're doing, especially in your great state of Ohio.
Great. Thank you for what you do. Everybody out there, have a safe hunt. Get out there and vote and make your voice heard.
Make your voice heard. That's going to do it for this episode of Deer Talk Now. All we ask you to do is like and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast. And we want to thank you guys because last week we crested 900,000 on Facebook and we crested 300,000 subscribers on YouTube. But if you want to watch the video versions, if you're listening to this, just hop over there to Facebook or YouTube or Instagram. And if you want to listen to it wherever your podcasts, your favorite ones are, you can find it there. Deer Talk Now. For Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted, I am Daniel Schmidt. We thank you, and we'll catch you next Thursday for another episode of Deer Talk Now.